It's great to be here in conversation with two great panelists. Why don't we start with some introductions?
Sure. So I'm Ryan Green, the co-founder and CEO of Gridwise. What does Gridwise do? Is we are the leading companion app for gig economy workers, particularly gig drivers who work for all these rideshare and delivery companies we've become so accustomed to, like Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, Instacart, others like that. We help them manage all of their gig work in one centralized app. And provide them insights on the markets they drive in to help increase their utilization, help them maximize their earnings. And as we have hundreds of thousands of those gig workers using our application, we are capturing very rich data on their working patterns, on supply and demand insights across all the gig platforms that they work for. So we productize that data, and then we provide different data solutions to many companies that are here today, autonomous vehicle companies. We work with the gig marketplaces, investors, real estate, retail, et cetera. So we're operating predominantly in the U.S. We're, as was mentioned earlier, we have a fairly global team, and we're starting to expand internationally.
Very good. Good afternoon. My name is Jeremy Carlson. I manage the research around automated autonomous ADAS, the entirety of that spectrum at S&P Global Mobility. We provide data and insights to the automotive industry, in particular to the supply chain, which is a huge focus for us on the technology side, to inform investment decisions, strategy, long-term planning, the vehicle platform choices around the content that we're talking about today here in autonomous vehicles, mobility, in particular working with Gridwise as well on some of these topics. Just really interesting to be here, and looking forward to sharing some of those insights with you guys as well today.
Thank you. So something that Mobileye CEOs said this morning that really stuck with me was you really need new sources of data because the existing sources of data has been exhausted. And so today we're going to talk about alternative data that will help inform up-and-coming AV operators on what the transportation landscape is like. And so I want to start with the key issue of pricing. Gridwise came up with a report in February that showed that Uber and Lyft prices have jumped more than 7% in 2024. And after surveying 1,000 consumers, they found that 7 in 10 people were going to cut back on their usage of ride sharing if the prices were going to increase further. And in fact, the price sensitivity has been referenced in Uber's earnings calls recently because people were, getting sensitive to price increases. And so with this in mind, would it get easier for AV firms to price their rides if driver earnings is out of the equation? Or what are some of the challenges you're thinking at seeing for AV firms?
Yeah, I mean, I think from our perspective is we see that this is there's a huge opportunity for AV companies to actually come in and better service the existing consumer sentiment, which is becoming pretty negative as prices are continuing to rise. And why is that? Is because you see that a huge driver of the price per mile that varies pretty drastically across cities today is driven by the labor costs of the drivers that are operating on Uber and Lyft today. You see that there's about, I think we see about a range between $2 per mile up to $4 per mile in cities like Seattle and New York, where there's minimum wage standards, which an autonomous vehicle would not have to abide by. And so because of that is like the other parts of that tie into that component is that you think of humans and how we behave more irrationally in our behaviors of how we're operating as a driver. Is like they may be working for multiple services, switching between them, going in different places that may not be the best place to be operating. And so they're spending about 22% of their miles deadheading. They're spending about 18 minutes between a drop-off to the next ride when they pick up a customer. And so I think an autonomous vehicle company has the opportunity to bring utilization down much more substantially, below 10% on pooled rides, maybe 12 to 15% on standard rides, to actually allow them to be more efficient, effective, and allow for us to kind of have a much lower price per mile for consumers.
Indeed. From our side, we think about pricing a little bit more long term because we help the industry really understand where these opportunities are going to be. We think about revenue, we think about technology decline costs. LiDAR obviously having a huge cost advantage right now in China due to the maturity of the supply chain, how quickly they innovate on a lot of that technology. Certainly an advantage when we compare it to a lot of the global suppliers who have good tech. They just haven't really been able to scale that up yet. So we dive into this pricing topic a little bit more from the top down side, even though a lot of the forecasting that we do is vehicle and platform specific. But I think the challenge that we're going to find here is that we have to get much more localized in the sources of data and the sources of insights that we need, because mobility is going to be hyper local. There are all of those local conditions that are getting infected, that are getting influenced, and price is really going to be at the center of that because it's a consumer facing product. And that's where automakers have to start. Automakers, supply chain, technology providers, everyone have to start thinking about that end use case and kind of backing it out from there. So the technology that you're putting out there is appropriately placed for the market that you're in and what you're trying to support in terms of demand and ridership.
So do you think, what are some of the ways that AV firms can sort of help bring down that cost per mile and without having to resort to stuff like surge pricing, or, what are some of the ways that, they can implement?
First order.
Yeah, exactly. I'll start because, a lot of technology is expensive, right? Like we've heard it from everyone pretty much throughout the day today. There's a lot that we can do to eventually bring it down. That's the expectation. We've got a ton of history that says technology gets cheaper over time, economies of scale, building it into vehicles eventually more efficiently. There's a lot of places at this point that we can still eke out quite a bit of cost improvement over time. What several have also said today is that automakers do a really good job at manufacturing vehicles today. Leave it up to them. They've had, a century of experience in doing this, but we're also dealing with a lot of different technology. We're dealing with very different environments. We're not even fortunately, we've talked a whole lot about trade and tariffs and everything that's throwing a big wrench into global supply chains here today. But increasingly, a really big area of investment, and one that the automotive industry hasn't traditionally done very well, is on the software side. And so much of the technology in vehicles today is coupled with or enabled or just directly is software based, that there's a huge opportunity, I think, to improve that. And that's where we're getting, I think, a lot of the partnership from companies that are here today, trying to bring some of that expertise and that value, and in turn, helping to drive those costs down for the end product.
Yeah, and I think our view is more from the operational standpoint. As you think about that, there's so many factors that we see, even in today's services, that are impacting price, and how much they vary by city, by time of day, by day of week, etc. But I think for an autonomous vehicle operator, what we are helping them do today is deeply understand demand and how dynamic demand is across a lot of those factors. You need to, as an operator, you need to figure out, okay, what zone am I going to be operating in based off of the density of demands, and ensuring the highest utilization possible by optimizing for highest density of demand, lowest distance trips, so you can have, back-to-back trips and minimize deadhead miles. And as you think about understanding that demand, it's like understanding demand by region, by events, by, what happens when there's weather. There's so many factors that tie into that. And so we have this kind of master view into how that's not only happening on rideshare, but also happening on delivery, and how consumer preferences may be changing across them. But if you can master that, and then you combine that with, a lot of the other underlying costs that go into it, and ensuring that, if those are stable, I think from an operational standpoint, it's demand, and then making sure that from a staging standpoint, you start to really understand the infrastructure, parking, electric vehicle charging stations, where those are placed, and all those pieces kind of tie together to allow you to maximize utilization, thus decreasing costs and having more margin to kind of work with to bring pricing down.
In your joint report that you released earlier this year, you talked a bit about how another way to bring down costs is maybe like utilizing the vehicles for pooled rides. Can you talk a little bit about that, and like what that would look like and affect, form factors for vehicles?
Yeah, I think in the pulled ride sense, I think there's as we look at, pulling and how that's played out, to present day, pre-pandemic, I think there was a lot of momentum building in pulled rides, where we saw that I think it was around anywhere from 10+% of rides were being pulled on Uber and Lyft. And as of today, we see that I think across both Uber and Lyft, Lyft is not offering pulled rides. So if you look at the total in just the rideshare category, it's like 1.7% of rides are pulled at the moment. And so I think for autonomous vehicle operator, there's an opportunity there, but I think you have to kind of understand like where are the types of rides being ordered for pulled today, and focusing there, and then figuring out how do you expand the market from there. But I think if you don't have alternative data that helps inform like where the consumer demand is for pulled rides today, and where the density of rides are occurring, then it's feels like a shot in the dark to like really start optimizing for that category.
Yeah. Hey, and just to add, we run a consumer survey in 8 different markets around the world just to help us understand some of those different kind of consumer acceptance trends, and in turn kind of help us grow the forecast in different ways. Now, fully appreciate that very few consumers have experience with autonomous vehicles, so it's really difficult to kind of ask them about a technology that they may have seen on TV but probably have never interacted with in real life. But we did see pretty much across the board, after the COVID lockdowns, there was clearly less interest from consumers in just being in shared spaces. They were looking for new technologies to help ensure that things were clean. We had a huge amount of interest from automakers in terms of surfaces that wouldn't retain sweat or anything from a previous passenger that might risk like their health. That kind of sentiment really took a big hit after COVID, and it's clearly been challenging, I think, to see how much it's recovered, and it hasn't quite, it seems, gathered a lot of that momentum here yet.
I want to shift gears a bit and talk about delivery. In your report, you talk about how big brands still dominate a lot of the transactions on the major platforms, and how on Uber and DoorDash, the share of non-food deliveries like grocery or retail has expanded because of their aggressive push into that categories in the recent years. And so how does that inform AV companies in deploying their delivery robots and their strategy there?
Yeah, well, I think for as you look at delivery, it's a whole nother animal as you think about how to operate in there, because now you have a 3-sided marketplace where you need to partner with, if you're going direct and you have a verticalized solution, as you see happening with a Waymo in some markets, some cases they're partnered with Uber, is now you need to kind of identify the right partnerships, and then you need to build the consumer demand, and then you have the right, the supply component to support that. And so I think it's great for, I think in the delivery side even more so, you see more partnerships or more appetite for partnerships with an Uber Eats, or potentially like growing more with a DoorDash as they start to enter into that more. And I think just being able to ride the coattails of a lot of their partnerships is going to be pretty key early on to be able to expand into what seems like a very rapid category that's prime for expansion, being grocery and retail, and focusing a lot more there and on anything that's like non-perishable as well, that can be easily batched in with a high batch percentage in orders.
And we're very automotive centric, so I'll just kind of add maybe briefly on this, is as automakers, suppliers have started to get into this space, we saw not just interest in mobility as a service, running people, kind of the ride-hailing, ride-sharing business model writ large, but working with commercial companies around delivery, grocery delivery, Domino's Pizza, and the like, simply because they needed to have a little bit more demand. They needed to have more people, more users and more partners to help them evaluate the technology, get some experience, get some reps in, so that they could understand what their next step was in strategy. And I think autonomous vehicles certainly could provide, they're hopefully meant to be multi-purpose. Running passengers around, I think, is what everyone is traditionally focused on. But if you can build some additional form factor or some delivery mechanisms into those same vehicles, it's just higher efficiency, higher utilization, and that's gonna win out here for your business model and your hopefully your profitability.
Jeremy, I wanted to get into some of your forecasts and expectations for when we're going to see a fully autonomous transportation network. How long will it take us to get there? And how long is it? Are we going to see like the hybrid model?
Hybrid model coexistence of these technologies is going to be around for quite some time. We never mind the fact that we do all of this research globally. I'm really happy, by the way, that we had a lot of expertise from China on the stage earlier today. It was a great panel discussion. But every place is going to be a little bit different. But also we've seen, I mean, I've gone through the hype cycle here a couple of times around autonomous technology, and expectations at least have moderated. They're a little bit more realistic here, but we understand also that it's going to be hyper local. There's a lot that goes into deploying autonomous mobility. It's going to be in a particular city or urban area. It's not, we can't just describe it as, hey, the United States is going to go autonomous in 2030. That's absolutely not the case. That's way, way, way too early. Where we've also seen how so relatively longer term, and we're still honestly single digit percentages of new vehicle sales after 2030 and probably well through the decade of the 2030s. Where we've also seen, however, and we've heard it from a lot of people on stage already today, is seeding that technology development pipeline through automated driving use cases. Level 2, Level 2 plus, Level 3, there is a huge amount of untapped potential in that market. It allows suppliers and technology providers to develop the technology, deploy it, begin generating revenue, which obviously for tier 1 suppliers in the automotive industry is always a critical priority. And that, but while it doesn't necessarily get us on its own to Level 4 mobility, it builds up the ecosystem and it builds up a strong foundation for it. And that we've seen from automakers and suppliers alike, that's where their near-term focus is. Everyone's interested in fully autonomous mobility. We know that there's a huge amount of potential out there. Making it scale, making it happen, these are really challenging things. We've heard it time and time again here today. Automated driving, Level 2 plus and Level 3, has a huge amount of potential here over the near term. And importantly, it relies on and utilizes the ownership model. We're not asking people to give up their second car or their first car, and adapt kind of their behavior of moving themselves or their families around. And that on its own provides a much kind of easier path to entry. So yeah. Long term, we do expect it to be there. We're still optimistic for all of the reasons that we've heard from everyone speaking today. But we also listen to the industry. We listen to automakers and suppliers, as well as all of the technology companies that want to disrupt. But the automotive industry is slow. It's a behemoth. It's good to be agile at the startup phase, but scaling it up, as we've heard today, it requires a certain amount of partnership. So we also have to be kind of realistic in those expectations.
So with every wave of AI innovation, there's talk of displacement of humans. How should companies and operators think about managing this transition during the hybrid era? Like, is there a way that human drivers can also contribute to this transitional period?
I think from our perspective of just obviously having a very direct relationship with the gig workers and gig drivers of today, is that from our end is like we expect very similar sentiment as Jeremy, is that we see that it's going to be a hybrid market for at least 10 to 15 years, if not more. And what you have today is you're starting to have you're going from this case of having human drivers handle all types of rides, and you'll start to transition into autonomous vehicles augmenting the human fleet and handling specific types of rides, to eventually being the base standard of those rides, and then humans eventually augmenting the autonomous vehicle, and then at some point going fully autonomous. I think that the considerations, though, over time that have to be solved and figured out is just like, okay, well, how do you deal for wheelchair accessible rides? How do you deal with situations where you're moving someone like an elderly person who needs help unloading and loading their baggage going to the airport. So there's a lot of, and then there's obviously the inclement weather components as well. And so I think for the foreseeable future, there's a hybrid market, and I think that's where we as a business get excited, is because we're very well positioned to kind of support both constituents and help them best figure out how to operate together.
It's great to hear that like there's the gig economy has written a lot of the playbooks that AV operators can adapt to, and we're excited to see what comes next and where we go from here. Thank you.